Afternoon. Fantastic. So we just got a few other people joining us in the chamber as well. What's fantastic, including Councillor Javid.
Good turnout online. Good turnout online. Good turnout, yeah.
Fantastic. So thank you.
More than one is good.
Oh, we've got that weird screen again, and I don't know how to turn it off. What we had last time, where you can see it on the screens, and I can't see it on my screen.
Can home see it? I wonder.
Let me just have a 30-second chat amongst yourselves. I think that needs to be turned off on the actual screen on the LBC computer, not my computer. So I need to find Angela or someone to go and do it. So bear with me 30 seconds and then we'll get going. Maybe in the meantime, we'll ask. Okay. Fantastic. So Marika's going to sort out the little screen you can see on your screens. What sort of says there's a recording in process, what blocks half of the screen. But in the meantime, what we'll do is we will just introduce our speakers for today. And then once we get that sorted, we will then share the screens and we'll start the presentation. So I'm just going to hand you over to Karina first from the Luton Roma Trust, just to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Karina Mortano. I'm really pleased to be here today. I think this is a great opportunity for us to raise awareness about the GRT group in the United Kingdom, and we really hope that after this discussion you'll have a little more understanding of all this group and the issues that they face here in Luton and generally in the United Kingdom. So I'm leading Luton Roma Trust with a charity that works with the Roma community here in Luton for more than 8 years now. We are helping the Roma community socially integrate in the city. We simply use a holistic approach in our work, and we help them with any problem they might have. And obviously, because of the very specific issues this community faces, they are quite dependent on us. So many of the Roma also moved in Luton just because they knew they would get the support they need here. So yeah, that's all I will say for now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Katrina. And over to Nalette from the Irish Forum.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So my name is Nolette Hanley, and I'm the CEO of Luton Irish Forum. The charity was set up 25 years ago to give a voice to the Irish community in Luton, and today our welfare, social, cultural and employment support extends far beyond Luton and includes Irish Traveller and other communities. Prior to this, and this is where my interest began, 18 years ago, I worked for Traveller Movement for 5 years coming up to that. And that's a national campaign charity, and I worked there for 5 years and continued to champion the cause since then. And just very quickly, the reason I'm here today is because we do a lot of work with the community. We work with the community through welfare benefit support, employment support, including CVs, job searches, Irish passport application and witnessing. And then more specifically, we've got family fun days. We're about to have our third one on this Sunday in partnership with Public Health. We've also do some good work in the prisons. So back in May 2018, Bedford prison was put into special measures. There was reported high violence, and 5 prisoners had sadly taken their lives in the previous 2 years. Bedford reached out for help with engagement, and since then we've been working with the community very effectively, and that's now extended to working across 4 prisons, including Little Hay, Five Wells and Stanford. And we do that through traveller forums, St Patrick's Day celebrations, GRT, Gypsy Roma Traveller Month celebrations, and we are currently in the middle of a mural identity project. So that's working with communities within the prison, led by the Gypsy Roma Traveller, encourage people to feel proud of their roots and to celebrate who they are. Thank you.
Fantastic, Nuala, and almost like it was magic, that little black box what appeared on your screen has now magically disappeared. It's almost like you timed that to perfection. So what I'm going to do now, just to say in the chamber as well, because you won't be able to see people, we've got Marek Lebowski, Social Justice Manager. We've got Councillor Javed Hussain, who is portfolio holder for highways, but also has the GRT community in his portfolio now. So we're very happy he's here. And we've got Sultan Khan, who's our one of our community development officers. So I'm just going to share my screen now, and Katrina is going to take us through a bit of a presentation, and then Nolette has got a little bit more to talk about and some artifacts and things from the traveller community to show us, and then we'll open it up to a bit of a discussion and a Q&A. So hopefully this works.
Yeah. Can I start?
Yeah, everyone can see the slideshow, can't they?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Claire.
Yeah, so well, let's start. So as we said, today we'll talk about the gypsies, Roma, and the travelers. Here in the UK, we are all part of a group which is abbreviated as GRT. So today we'll give you an overview of what GRT means, what are the issues of this particular group in the UK and in Europe generally, and we'll also show you some facts about similarities and differences of these three ethnic groups, I would say, within one. I will start the presentation by just introducing, within a few sentences, who are the gypsies and the Roma, to then allow Nolette to explain us a bit more about the Irish travellers. Once we have a clear understanding about the Irish travellers, I'll just then go back to the Roma, and I will explain a little more in detail who they are and what are the issues they face. So, with your permission, I would like to start with the first slide and talk a bit about the gypsies and the Roma, and to explain you that what makes them similar, what brings them together, is the nomadic lifestyle they have. The gypsies have been born in the UK, whereas the Roma have come to the UK from Central Eastern Europe mostly. They come at more or less at the same time in Europe. They have Indian origin, as I will mention a bit later. But what unites them is the lifestyle they have and the challenges they face just because they were from this particular ethnic group. The Roma started arriving in the United Kingdom after the 1990, when the communists fell. So then their situation was completely disastrous. So they have to find ways to survive. And the UK was one of the countries they came in, initially as refugees, of course. Later on, we had this opportunity of being able to come to the UK legally, after Romania and other Central Eastern European countries have become members of the European Union. And we started coming in bigger numbers since 2007. We are now a big population in United Kingdom, which is, I don't want to, make a mistake, but I think is around 300,000, 500,000 Roma living here. Of course, we do face similar issues with the gypsies. I would just allow Nolette to tell us a bit more about the Irish travellers and how they actually complement this group they are part of here in the UK.
Okay, thanks, Karina. So traditionally, Irish travellers are a nomadic group of people, so that's in common, originally from Ireland, but have a separate identity, heritage and culture to the community in general. An Irish traveller presence can be traced back to the 12th century, with migrations to Great Britain in the early 19th century. The Irish traveller community is categorised as an ethnic minority under the Race Relations Act 1976 and amended in 2000, the Human Rights Act 1998, and the Equalities Act 2010. Some Irish travellers identify as Pavi or Minker, which are words from the Irish traveller language.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Nolet. So it is important to underline the fact that the Irish travellers are a completely distinct ethnic group from the Roma and the Gypsies. Because that's important in many aspects. And it's also important to say that the UK Parliament, the UK government has acknowledged that the extreme situation in which the Roma and Gypsies and travelers are in the United Kingdom in 2006 when it said Gypsies, travelers, and Roma are among the most disadvantaged people in the country and have poor outcomes in key areas such as health and education. So if it is to talk first about the Roma and the Gypsies, I would definitely like to start with the history. What I personally believe, is that it's important for anyone who wants to understand about the Roma and the Gypsies that they need to understand the history, the context, because without understanding the key issues that they passed through, it would be hard to understand who they are now and why they are here. So the Roma have Indian origins. They come from the north of India, from Punjab region, and they were happily living there until about 11th century when a Muslim invasion came in, which simply threw us out from this territory. As a result, we couldn't obviously find ways to live together, so we left India and we started our journey towards Europe, and we passed through many countries in our way to Europe. And those are the Arabic countries. Egypt is one of them, and there are so many misconceptions of whether Roma or Gypsies are actually coming from Egypt. Of course, we took some of the culture of all these countries we passed through in our way to Europe. And we arrived in Europe in about 14th century. So it took us about 300 years to be here in Europe and be in another place. When we arrived here, obviously we were different than the majority population. We were dressed differently. Many Roma were using entertainment as a way of living. And we're simply not talking the language of the others. So obviously there were already so many differences. And feelings of, the discrimination and superiority, started being born within the majority population. And for many years in Europe, many countries adopted racial laws against the Roma, against the Gypsies. In 1530, here in the United Kingdom, the Egyptian Act was adopted by which the Roma were banned to enter this country, or those who were in were supposed to live in 16 days. So you can imagine the amount of anger that existed within the majority population in relation to this, to this minority group. In Romania, Roma were enslaved for 500 years, and that's something which really affected us, impacted us in a very negative way throughout our lives, because so many Roma discuss about this very tragic event in the history of the Roma, and reminds about it. It reminds about the torture they were part of just because they were Roma. So just to give you an example, for example, while they were enslaved, Roma women were of course not allowed to get married with non-Roma men. They were being taken advantage of by their non-Roma owners, or Roma were simply used as entertaining materials, and the owners were simply treating them miserably just because they were Roma and they were owning them. And then our our history really culminates with the Holocaust, when outrageously, 70% of the Roma who were living in Europe at that time disappeared in Holocaust. I know that there are different sources of information in relation to Holocaust. Some which say 300,000 Roma lived in Europe at that time. Others say 500 Roma actually died as a result of Holocaust. But I found, an American source which indicates that the number of Roma who disappeared in Holocaust is 2 million, which is it's horrible to even think about. The Roma comes from the word, from the Romani word, Rom, and Rom means human. It is important that you know that this is in no way connected with Rome or Romania. Because, of course, in my work, many times I interact with public officials or, persons in a particular capacity working at different levels. And I'm getting asked these questions. Are Roma coming from Romania? Are they from Rome? What is the actual meaning of the word? So it's important that we distinguish, this Roma is not Roma, Romania or Rome. The Roma may have Romanian nationality, but by no means they are not Romanian, yeah? There are around 10 to 12 million Roma in Europe, and that's a big number of them. The majority of the Roma live in Central Eastern Europe, with Romania, who has the biggest number of Roma, which is around 2 million, followed by Bulgaria. And then the other countries, Slovakia, Czech Republic, Hungary, which has, lower numbers, but still very, very big issues, I would say. We also have to understand that calling someone gypsy in Europe, in Central Eastern Europe, is very offensive. In the United Kingdom, it is accepted, it is politically correct. However, when you go to Central Eastern Europe, that's a different matter. And that's because gypsy comes from the Greek atinganoi, which means untouchable. And that, in a way, puts our status at the same level with the Dalits in India. So many Roma find it really offensive. But you'll also go to places like, for example, Czech Republic, where many Roma would prefer being called gypsies, which I was surprised about. But I think it really comes from the fact that they do not have a real understanding of what is the impact of this word. And of course, we have a flag and we have a language that is our own. And it's also very interesting to note that this language, Romanes, is the only language in Europe which can be spoken wherever you would go in Europe and someone speaks Romani language, you'll be able to understand what they say. And that's quite valuable and it's quite unique about a language really in general. And the flag and the Roma anthem as well, which is Jelem Jelem. I don't know whether you can search for it on YouTube or, I can send it to you if you are interested to hear it. Were adopted as officials on the 8th of April, 1971, here somewhere near London. And the 8th of April also became the International Roma Day. So that's when we actually celebrate our culture and our life here in Europe and all including all what it brings with it. And it's also important to say that there are countries everywhere in the world. In every country you would go, you would still be able to find Romas. They are everywhere. They are also in Western countries. They are in America, in Canada, wherever. I personally researched to see how many countries out of 192, you would find Roma, and I think about 182 countries you would be able to find Roma living there, or at least, yeah? Yeah, let me just try it. I cannot, in my laptop, okay. So you remember I was mentioning about the enslavement in Romania and the Holocaust and so on. Well, after the Holocaust and after that period ended, Romania and other Central Eastern European countries have adopted assimilation programs. Well, this had both negatives and positives about, the integration in that sense, because on one side, the Roma received a job, yeah, they were placed into employment, they were able to have a house and have a family, but on the other side, they were forced to leave their culture behind. They were not really allowed to wear the traditional dress, and they were forced to give up all what they had brought with them. And that, of course, resulted in many Roma, for example, not being able to speak Romani language today, or many Roma adopting a different lifestyle. But what also happened during the communist era is that many Roma women got sterilized without their consent. There is a documentary which is really hard to watch, but this is a harsh reality that during the communists, simply Roma were not asked whether they want to have more children or not. They were simply, having their bodies taken away so that they wouldn't be able to ever have children. And that happened without their consent. It happened even after the fall of the communism, and there are a few cases that went to the European Court of Human Rights, and as a result, the states were found as violating the European Convention, but that still didn't change the things much. For example, you see, I put here an example in Romania, where in 2013, an extremist national party initiated a campaign in which simply they were giving 300 lei, which is like 60 pounds, to every Roma woman if she accepted to be sterilized. And that happened publicly. And you can imagine the scandal that was in the country at that time. The majority population also tried to build walls between Roma and non-Roma, and that happened in more countries in Central Eastern Europe, including Romania, Czech Republic, Slovakia, even Hungary at some point. There were some attempts. Forced evictions also took place in Romania, in Slovakia, in Italy, even in Sweden. Wherever we try to find a way to survive or to settle down, obviously people did not really understand where we are coming from and what are our particular needs, and did not try to support us in any way to feel integrated. So that's why all forced eviction happened. But there's also a deeply rooted racism within this majority population, which is very unfortunate, because even here in the United Kingdom, even here in Luton, when I try to include Roma and non-Roma in a conversation, but non-Roma who are coming from Romania, still you can feel that they wouldn't want to mix with the Roma, because they are coming from the same country and they have the same perception about the Roma in general. So obviously, when you put them together, they are not changed. So it takes time. It takes time to change mentality. And finally, there was a lot of police brutality. A lot of Roma have been beaten up by the police. Some of them even died at police stations or were simply maltreated in front of their children. During the COVID-19, again, there was a police brutality on the justification that the Roma did not respect the rules of the lockdown. So that, came with a lot of police violence. So in a shell, really, the Roma do face discrimination in all areas of public life, including access to housing, access to quality education, access to employment, access to medical services. They face high rates of poverty and marginalization. And I tried to put here a picture, which I took it from Fundamental Rights Agency report from 2016, which shows the house of a Roma family. And I'm not sure you can see it very well, but I think you can understand the level of poverty, the fact that these people are living their life in a place, if you can see, not surrounded by any gates or anything, which also takes us to thinking that it might be a situation of a family like many others who build a house, but who do not have the the proper authorization to build that house there. So they are always at risk of eviction. So if someone comes to check the legal situation, they would immediately decide to evict them because they wouldn't have any legal right to be there. So yes. So yeah, do you want to? Yeah, please.
Yeah, at this point, it'd be good to jump in with some statistics on Irish travellers. And speaking with Karina, it's similar to the Roma community and the English Gypsy community as well. So unfortunately, the life expectancy of travellers is 10 to 12 years less than the wider population, and that's quite stark. Government research confirms that the traveller communities face significant health inequalities, the higher rates of mortality, morbidity, long-term health conditions, anxiety, depression, compared to the settled community. And when surveyed in the 2011 census, we don't have data from the 2021 census yet, 14% felt that they were in poor health, and that's in comparison to 6% of the white British population. They experience, as Karina said, racist sentiment in the media and elsewhere. It's actually more acceptable to be racist against the community than accepting, and it's very similar in Ireland. Our community is not always most accepting of the Irish traveller community, sadly. Ofsted consider young travellers to be one of the groups most at risk of low attainment in education. And I mentioned suicide in prison. Sadly, that is not limited to prison. So men are 7 times more likely to take their own lives. And this is more common amongst young traveller men within the ages of 15 to 25. And it's 5 times higher for traveller women than in the general population. And I've heard of situations where the young women are at risk of having children taken off them by social service, children going into care. And I've heard of a few instances where they have felt that there's no choice but to take their own lives in that situation. And similar to Karina as well, accommodation insecurity, poor living environment, low education, attainment, economic exclusion, community isolation and discrimination all compound this negative impact on their physical and mental well-being. And it's fair to say as well, the government services rarely include travellers in their consultations. We have, when I worked with Traveller Movement, we worked hard to engage the community, but they are not able to engage if they have got more immediate concerns like poor health, poor accommodation, and they don't have that trust with the statutory services. So it's very difficult. There's a lot more work to be done. Thanks.
Yeah, and if I can just substantiate a bit the access to education, really, because of course Nolette mentioned the low education attainment for the Irish travellers, which is of course very true for the Roma population as well. But what is also very unique about the Roma and the issues they face in education in Central Eastern Europe is the fact that many Roma children attend segregated schools. These are segregated schools are within the Roma community, which is usually, in the suburbs or in a place which is a long distance from the majority population, where of course the quality of education is very low because no teacher wants to come and teach the Roma only. There's no proper infrastructure in the school. There are no windows sometimes, not proper benches. And children are really forced to stay there the whole day and try to study something. And when they come home and they come to a house like this one I showed you in the picture, where they don't have electricity and they don't have even what to eat, of course, education is not anymore their priority. So, they need to be first fed, they need to be taken care of in order for them to want to study. And that's the reason why, with the Roma community, we have a very low education attainment. Here in the UK, many Roma are illiterate, or some completed their primary education. Very few were able to advance their education and go to high school, and just a handful of people, I would say, very few people from the Roma community succeeded to go and go to a faculty or have a postgraduate degree, or that's very rare for a Roma to have, and that's really impacts of course the issues of this community and their lifestyle. Yeah. And of course, we come to this question: how do you recognize Roma? I got these questions many times, so I thought it's important to have it today as a discussion point. And the answer is there is no way you can recognize Roma unless they self-identify as Roma. It is very hard to say who is a Roma and who is not, because you have one here today. I am a Roma, and you see how I'm being dressed today. But there are also Roma who are coming from very traditional families who wear the long skirts. They are also Roma. And then there are also Roma who wear long skirts, but straight type, and they always cover their head. That's because they come from a particular religious group. So within the Roma, there are many differences and many groups, I would say. So it's really hard. I was told many times that I look like an Indian girl or a Pakistani girl. Nobody actually believes when I tell them I'm from Romania. It's very strange for them to understand that. And then I tell them, yes, you are right, actually. My forefathers are from India. What is it? They continue and they ask me, oh, really? That's amazing. When was that? What time they lived and so on. So what I want to underline is that we are very diverse, and it's really hard to know who is a Roma and who is not. Unless they say, yes, I'm a Roma, you would know they are a Roma. Otherwise, you cannot make that assumption. You can definitely make that assumption, and you can ask them. However, many Roma faces low self-esteem, and they wouldn't say they're Roma because they think something bad would happen to them if they say they're a Roma. So obviously now they're in a country where they have the opportunity to express themselves, but it takes time to teach them that they shouldn't be scared or anything to explain who they are really. That comes from our history, and it takes me back to thinking, in that period with the Holocaust and the deportation of the Roma in Transnistria. When, for example, the Nazi troops came to my village, and they asked the mayor, where are the gypsies, right? Because they were calling us gypsies at that time. And the mayor said, there are no gypsies here in my village. You can go to the next village, but there are no gypsies here. And that's how my grandparents escaped of not being deported. So from that moment onwards, they decided not to teach their children Romani language, because they said this is a way of being identified as a Roma, and there's a risk, actually, we would be killed. So obviously, as a result, my parents don't speak Romanes. My father, and I don't speak Romanes, and I feel really sorry about that. I try to, of course, I can understand, but I cannot speak fluently. And that's a pity, but that's one of the reasons Roma would simply not say who they are, because they are afraid of the discrimination they would face as a result. Yeah, and do you want to add something?
Well, it's the same applies for Irish travellers. You can't assume Irish travellers are Irish travellers without identifying. Sadly, they often identify as Irish or white British, and it actually causes problems in terms of providing good services for them, particularly in the prison service. So that's a big piece of work going on to encourage travellers to identify as the W3, because they can get more support for their mental and physical well-being. But I agree with Karina that you'd need to ask the traveller. They mightn't actually admit to it because of the history of discrimination, sadly. But again, I suppose the learning is not to make any assumptions.
If I may add something, I just remember that in, most of the time in any official document we would get, when I'm in process of writing a grant application, or, I'm going to NHS with someone and they gave us a questionnaire where they collect data about the ethnicity and so on. Roma is not on the list. Most of the time I can find gypsies and travelers, or BAME, but I cannot find Roma as a specific group. And I think that would help us, because if we have enough data about this particular group, then we are in a position to better help them. That's something maybe we can think together about it and see if we can solve that problem in a way or another. Yeah. And the last slide is just about some reading resources on Roma, which I thought, would be good for you to have them. So you can refer to them whenever you need to understand who the Roma are. And that's a report from UK Parliament. I've also included some reports from Friends, Families, Travellers, which is a big organization actually working at a different scale. And there's particularly a report on maternal health inequalities, economic and financial exclusion, and so on. I've also included a YouTube video which was produced by Luton Roma Trust with some funding from Near Neighbours, which actually where we interview some Roma living in Luton, and we asked them about their life here, why they decided to come here, how they find living here, and so on. And lastly, we included some common myths about gypsies and travelers, so you have, better understanding of the misconceptions, but also some challenging, Irish traveler challenging the myths, again, which is from Pavi Point organization, a document. So we hope you find them useful. And if you have any questions at any point in time, please do get in touch with us, because we want to help you understand more about who we are. Thank you.
Fantastic. I think you've got a little bit more on Irish travellers as well, haven't you? And just to say to everyone, we'll make sure, because as I said at the beginning, we're recording this session, but we'll then upload it onto the Lunch and Learn area we're building on the internet, but we'll also include Katrina and Nilette's notes on there, so actually people can access those resources. But yeah, Nilette, I think you've got some bits and pieces to talk about and show us as well, haven't you?
Yes, so I thought it'd be useful to know about the accommodation setup. So, travellers aren't just living in caravans. Actually, 2/3 live in houses. And Karina mentioned earlier, we think that there's anything in approximately 300,000 travellers living in the UK. Some are living on the roadside, and that's called unauthorised encampments, and that often causes problems. It's often around funerals or weddings that there might be encampments, and usually it attracts a lot of poor publicity in the media. I mentioned earlier that the travellers are living in settled accommodation, and some then travel during the summer. But there is research done showing that if travellers are prevented from travelling, that they suffer poor health as a consequence. I also brought some artifacts and some memorabilia with me today. This have been donated to us by the Traveller Education Service, which sadly isn't in operation anymore. So I'll show it up. So travellers are very proud of their Delph. Hopefully it can be seen. So this is a kind of a smaller miniature version of some of the Delph that you'd see in beautifully kept caravans.
We'll also take some photos of these before Nilette leaves and put them on Yammer as well, so anyone who can't quite see them online will be able to see them there as well.
And horseshoes. Travellers have a passion for horses, and Roma as well.
My grandfather actually was I was saying that the Roma, as well as the Irish traveller, they have a specific passion for creating horse shoes, and my grandfather was one of them. So he's he made a living out of it. He was quite famous in the village.
And This is a wagon. So this is a traditional accommodation that was used. This one is made out of brass. Absolutely beautiful. And Karina mentioned Friends, Families of Travellers. I'm aware that they have an exhibition in Brighton as we speak, and that is to celebrate Gypsy Roma Traveller Month. So if you happen to be near or travelling to Brighton, please pop down and have a look. And just a couple more artefacts is in iron. It's quite heavy actually, beautifully painted. And some wooden spoons and pegs. I believe these are English gypsy, and some pegs. Yeah. Yeah, that's me done.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Nolette and Karina, for that, I think, really insightful presentation. What we'd like to do now is open it up to questions or comments. So if you're online, do feel free to use the raise hand button so we know who was internal, pop them in the chat. And if you're in the chamber, just give us a wave, and obviously just remember to turn on your microphone so people can hear you as well. So who wants to kick it? Marek.
Yeah, just to echo that, thanks to both of you. And I mean, both of you lead organisations that are working right now with Gypsy Roma traveller communities in Luton. So, and we know you're doing some amazing work in that space. I think it'd be really helpful to understand those challenges that you see day to day with those communities that are part of our community, and perhaps also any reflections you have about how partnership work could assist you in that in the future, because that's very much what we invited you in to speak about, as well as the insight into the community. So anything you'd like to share on that would be really welcome. Thank you.
So we have certainly, as long as I've been at Luton Irish Forum, so 18 years, we've worked with Irish travellers on their welfare benefits. I think because of a history of discrimination, travellers are they're mistrusting. So they're inclined to be very private about what information that they'll give. It takes a while to build up the trust. And all I can say is, and a lesson I was taught very early on when I worked for a traveller movement is not to overpromise. And that they judge you on your word. And with that, a trust is built. I think it is easier as an Irish person working with the traveller community because they hear the accent and the guard comes down, and that I'm familiar with the community as well. So again, they don't pick up. I think they're very sensitive to people's response to them. So I think we be mindful of how you respond and how respectful you are to them, and don't make any judgment. Another area that we work with very actively is Irish passports. Sadly, since Brexit, travellers who work largely in Europe doing groundwork, it's really hindered and impacted on their work. So they have been very actively looking for Irish passports. That could be very complicated because they might have several addresses. They might have been christened one name, and because there was several other Seans in the family, they might have taken on a new name. So you have to prove that identity. There's this concept that they can't have an Irish passport if they have a UK passport. So often they don't have the identification that's needed, or definitely ones that are in date. And a few actually thought they weren't entitled to have both passports. So it's a lot of, perceptions, mistrust. The impact of having poor literacy has really affected how they, can get help to help themselves. But we find that generally over time, as trust builds, you can actually help them deal with a number of issues and resolve them. Thanks.
Yeah, well, Mara, just to answer your question, I think for a few years now, we've felt that Luton Council is a lot more open of working with us, and I think that's really great, and we really want to thank you for that, because we are grateful for the opportunities you have already given to us so far. And I think one way of supporting our work is we've been thinking for a very long time to create a training package that we could offer to public officials on Roma cultural awareness. There were multiple issues with bringing them into reality because of the capacity issues, financial issues, and so on. But what would help us is if we could have, your view on that, on whether you think that would be helpful for Luton Council and other officials to have. Because if we know this is something useful for you to have, then we'll work towards achieving that. And if you could give us the support and maybe the space for discussion, we would be really grateful, I think. Thank you.
Fantastic, thanks both. Is there any other questions, comments, thoughts from anyone? Councillor Javed.
Thank you, Karina and Nolette, for a wonderful presentation. I think it's definitely I think it was well worth coming. It's definitely a lot of learning, so I think we should welcome some sort of training pack for councillors and for members. I think it may be that we circulate the notes that we've got. I think most people didn't know. Now, here's the challenge for me, because obviously as portfolio holder, I've been thinking about, well, where's the sites to have a site? Because if you're a traveller, it's not healthy to go on a somebody's park or somebody. So that's one of the myths that causes the problem, yeah? So how do we do it in Luton when it's landlocked here? Because I know the nearest one I'm thinking is Pepperstock, then I'm thinking Barton-le-Clay, but it's not Luton. And how do we create a site that somebody could actually come, and maybe issue a site license so you can actually legitimately come on that piece of land without being considered as trespassing, yeah? Now, I think that's one question. And then secondly, how do we, while you're traveling, because it's hard enough to get school, because to lift people out of poverty through skills and education, how do we make sure that we eradicate the literacy by ensuring that the children, is it online, and do the parents themselves have the ability to be able to home teach? I think I'll just start on those two, and then, because they're quite very big questions.
Thank you. They're excellent questions. So that's something I'm actually really passionate about, is that there should be tolerated sites. I'm aware of 50 consistent encampments by a particular family earlier this year. I mean, it's not a good use of public funding. I know that there is resistance, and it's politically unpopular, but it could be done on a pilot basis, short term. It doesn't have to be huge. I think there was talk about that the standard should be 14. It doesn't have to be that. I know that we've had encampments at the car park adjacent to us, and there was about 5 caravans. The families gave no trouble. What would have been helpful is to have a portaloo and some refuse facilities, but they did. It was actually around the St. Patrick's weekend of last year. So I did say to them, look, we have a parade, and look, can you clean up? And there was no problem with either. Sometimes the rubbish is left because they have been evicted at, antisocial hours, and done with force. So, unfortunately, that's not going to lend itself to someone saying, hang on a second while I clean up before I leave. On the other matter on education, I know Traveller Movement has got an Open Doors project. It's hugely popular and successful, and it is online tuition for the traveller community, where they can actually get an online tutor and have remote sessions and get support that way. But there is a lot of work to be done. But I know that's a model of good practice, certainly there. Thank you.
So just going back to point one, obviously, I think the challenge here is for us to identify a site.
Yes.
Because that's, I think, the key thing, because obviously your car park, you may be tolerant, other people will not be tolerant of their car park. And that's what it is about tolerance. Equally, open spaces are limited. People park, whatever, they feel threatened or whatever they do, for whatever their reasoning they have behind them, yeah, they don't, not happy when we do, and then we as an authority go to court and move them on. And like you said, at some time, end of night, that's not helpful for anybody. So we need to identify. So I guess the challenge is, are you aware of any sites where we could do it? Because here we also have within the communities. So I know at Stopsley, the traveller community, they didn't accept a new traveller community. That's would Pepperstock community accept it? So there's that internal. How do we also the prejudice that exists within the internal traveller community? So there's the external factors, but there's the internal factors. How do you think we could bridge it? And do you have any ideas of any sites? Because obviously, places like Luton, the land is very expensive, but to make it worthwhile, it'd have to have either porta cabins, showers. It'd have to be something properly that we could issue, because I think they would be, from what I can see, they would happy to buy a site license. They could have wash facilities, they could have cooking, so almost like a campsite. How do we create that environment so that the travellers can come in, can enjoy, and can leave when they're ready to leave and carry on with their travelling lifestyle? Because I'm assuming that the travellers only want to be here for a short period, whether it's for a wedding, whether it's for a funeral, or whether they're just passing through for a few weeks. How do we do that? And then on the second point is, do they have the reliable broadband? Because most people at home will argue that they haven't got good broadband. So how can we also, unless they're to a good signal, how do we ensure that they get it? Because one of the things I was reading, so on the myths, because this is a really good document here, and travellers, travelling boys usually start working with their fathers around 11 age, were traditional. Well, if they're doing that, they're not getting the schools in addition, and that will lead to literacy, and that's not good for them. How do they then get in? If you don't have the certain, how do you know, without having support from certain charities or organisations, how can they access health? How can they access to welfare benefits? How do they access the facilities that most of us people take for granted?
Okay. Right. Go back to the question of the sites. I don't know of any sites off the top of my head. I do know that there's no provision for travellers, no local authority council provision. The site in Stopsley is English Gypsy, as far as I'm aware. So you're not actually making any provision available. I'd argue that it's going to be unpopular if you do put a permanent site in, or even a tolerated site, but it's unpopular now, where there's nothing provided for, and then there's no refuse facilities, no toilet facilities, and invariably litter when people are moved off quickly.
I was just going to say on that, Nola, and then Councillor, there's some really good practice from places like Leeds where they've had negotiated stopping. Yeah. So actually what they do is they negotiate with the community to say, actually, okay, we know you're coming for a funeral, we know you're coming for a wedding, we know actually you're going to be passing through. So what you can do is we will agree that you can stop for a week or 2 weeks, because it might be a funeral or wedding match, and we'll provide at that point a skip, please use it, etc. But at that point you need to move on. And because from my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because these are our experts, but actually, going on your word as sort of Nolette said, and that gentleman's almost agreement is actually more powerful ever than a court document or anything, and it doesn't then cost to bring in bailiffs and bring in the agreements and stuff. There's a couple of people hands up online, but I just thought that was a useful point to come in on.
Education, I have a quick answer on that. Yeah, when I did a piece of work for Marek in your team on the EDI and spoke to, I think it was 4 different travellers, the common theme was we want our kids to be educated. That's not all of them. I spoke to one of our members, and he said actually he's anxious for his son to be equipped and go to Germany, and like you say, start learning groundwork at the age of 11. So he sees that that's his future. But I think we need to show that travellers need to be integrated. They need opportunities. They need to be teachers. They need to take up medical professions, and then they can influence that way. but that's going to take time.
And back to Scott, I think, Scott, I think what you've said is very pertinent. We need to look at, because the only way is to, unless we can provide facilities, I think people would, I think they'll be more tolerant, they would accept. So if we had a site where travellers could, like you say, stop over site, I think that would be more tolerant, because that would, from an authority point of view, we don't really take any pleasure in going to court and taking it. I can honestly show you, it's usually resident driven. It's not usually, the residents are on it because, oh, we can't access the park, we can't do this. But if they had a dedicated site, even if it was a stopover site, that would take away that element, and we could then bridge and give them the shower blocks, the bins, and everything else, and they could leave in a dignified manner as when they're ready to leave, rather than be, forcibly, which isn't good for anybody.
I think just very quickly, Stonewall did research 20 years ago to prove that the LGBTQ community were the most disadvantaged, and it proved that the Gypsy and Traveller community was. But equally, within that research, it was quite pertinent that they said that if people had the opportunity to meet that community, well, there was half as likely to be prejudiced. So another piece of advice is to, have cultural awareness sessions, be proud of promoting Gypsy Roma Traveller Month. This is improved greatly to what we had last year. We talked about this last year, Mark, but there's several events being organised this year, and I think it can only improve people's perceptions and their tolerance. Thanks.
Christina, and then Margaret, we've got hands up.
Thank you, Scott. Hi, everybody. Christina Gleeson, Public Health. I take it you can hear me okay. So thank you very much, ladies, for your really insightful and fascinating presentations. They were really, really informative. Even being from the Irish community I've definitely learned even more information today than what I may have had when I grew up in Ireland or since I've come into my public health job. I suppose one of my first points is around, you talked about education. So education it comes under the wider determinants of health, and the wider determinants of health, which many people know about, look at the social, economic, and environmental factors which are modifiable, you can change, and they can then shape things like education, income, employment, housing, and they can be impacted by racism and discrimination as well. So it's quite interesting that you guys talked about health and health outcomes and health inequalities quite specifically with infectious disease or communicable disease, infectious disease, disease you can pick up or pass on, or issues like cancer, which you can't. But then there's the other aspects of health which could be challenged and improved by access and education and being more informed. And I do think it is incumbent on us as a local government to adhere to our duty. So we obviously have the public sector equality duty. In health, there's the legal duty, the National Healthcare Act 2006, which we have to adhere to. And within all that, kind of going back to my idea of education and access, we learned a lot during the COVID pandemic. So we learned a lot about access, about making things accessible, about going to the people and making the changes that the people need in order to engage in the service. So whether that be language, whether that be trust, whether that be myth busting. And I do feel all those key learnings that we got out of COVID do have links and relate to all areas of our life, and they can come into education. So you can build up trust that your child won't be segregated if to come into the school. You can build up trust that if there was discrimination or issues faced by your child in the school, that they would be managed in an appropriate and sensitive manner. And I do think that's very important. And just on the issue of access and integration, I often think if you make the changes needed for the minority, but the people who are facing the greatest disadvantage and have the greatest health need, you're actually doing a lot harder work than you are if you're trying to meet the needs of the majority. Because the idea of the needs of the majority is you can take yourself to the doctor, you could get a lift or arrange something to someone to bring you somewhere so you can have your needs met. But actually, if you are more disadvantaged, if you do move around a lot, if you need, you know, letters to follow you, if you're undergoing cancer treatment, for example, if you can work out those kinks and those, you know, those challenges, you're actually doing the hardest work first. And I do think that's probably, you know, where the issues lie. We do need to start small, and we do need to see what works and see what works for people. But actually, if we tackle those hard challenges and those hard questions, we might actually end up making it easier for the majority just by default, because we've looked at the really hard questions and we've found solutions, and then we can move on from that. So yeah, I suppose the key learning for me today, it really is obvious that there is more that joins us than divides us. There's a lot more similarities than we potentially give ourselves or other communities credit for. So yeah, thank you very much, ladies, and yeah, look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Thanks, Christina. Margaret, we'll come to you briefly because we are a little bit over time and I know a couple of people are dropping off, but please share your thoughts.
Okay, I was just going to be super quick to say in response to the councillor that I'm in the local plan, the policy team in the council, and we're starting the local plan review, and we're in touch already with ORS, the consultants who advised on Gypsy, Roma and Traveller needs assessment for the current local plan. And we're also aware that housing needs of Gypsies, Romas and Travellers has to be part of the overall housing need and requirement assessment for the borough, so that it's all done as one, basically, because so many of the groups are settled, as was explained earlier. And this has been a great presentation and a really useful lunchtime session, because it shows the depth of understanding that we don't necessarily yet have. So thank you.
Fab, and it sounds like there's a real good connection here, Margaret, for us to put you in touch with Karina and Nalette, so they can support with engaging with their particular communities as well as you develop that framework.
Absolutely, because we cannot engage direct. I know that from elsewhere. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Margaret. I think I'm really glad you're here and we are being connected really now, because I think there are many issues which you can clarify through us, and we'll do our best to support your work, because I think it is within the interest of the community really, and everyone's interest. So thank you so much.
Fantastic. So I'm going to draw the session to a close there because we are 5 minutes over. We'll share this recording on the internet, and we'll also share the presentation, and we'll share some of the photos from Nalette's artifacts as well on Yammer and the internet, so people can see those if you weren't in the chamber or couldn't see them via the camera. Thanks to everyone who came. Our next session will be in July, and it'll be focusing on Disability Awareness Month. Date to be confirmed, but keep an eye on the internet. And we're going to continue these as we go through. I'm going to try and do them monthly on different communities in Luton. So please, if you do have ideas or suggestions, come forward to Social Justice and we'll happily work with you to develop a future programme. But thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you very much.